Well, as you know, I'm not a great fan of like academia when it comes to things like looking at ancient history and megaliths and ancient sites and mythology. At the same time, I'm not too fond of much of what passes for alternative research in this stuff because it seems to be this, what I call the Masonic continuum. That would be individuals who seem to pick up Masonic type thinking or British Israelite type thinking relating to mythology and megaliths and then continue to add their layer on top of it or extrapolate or connect it to something else because they think that's a solid foundation. It's absolutely not a solid foundation. It's the same kind of muck we're dealing with in the political system or in the every other thing, culture, pop culture, you name it, everything else we're dealing with, the same deception. Now, I still see people talking about Scotia's grave in County Kerry and how that's proof that Egypt is connected to Ireland. Well, it's completely bullshit, and I'll tell you why. There was this group called the British Israelites, or British Israelism, and I've spoken about this so much, and I wish people would pay attention before they assuming that these things are real. British Israelism was obsessed with the idea that the Bible was true, and that the 12 tribes of the Bible had left the holy land, or unholy land as I call it, and moved out, scattered out throughout the world. And they believed that certain tribes ended up in different countries. And in Ireland, they believed that the tribe of Daniel, had landed in Ireland. And the proof they had used for this was, this sounds like that, or this looks like that. So, for instance, they went down to Kerry and they saw they saw a megalithic, chamber or temple or whatever, the Druids. And someone said the name of it locally, and someone said, "Oh, that sounds like Scotia. Oh, that means that she's buried here." Or you have other situations where they said that the proof that the tribe of Daniel ended up in Ireland was the Tuatha De Danann. Now, the Tuatha De Danann is the people of the goddess Danu. By the way, it's pronounced Tuatha De Danann, not Tuatha De Danann, as some of these so-called researchers say it. If they can't even pronounce the stuff properly, how can the rest of their research be any good? So this is important stuff here. Now, there's the idea of yes, Scotland was called Scotia by the Romans, and the reason for this, and Caledonia too. Now the reason why was because there was an Irish tribe that invaded Scotland called the Scoti, and that's how that came about. But they were not connected to Scotia or any of the figures in ancient Egypt. They just sounded like, must be like, that kind of nonsense. And these British Israelites did atrocious damage, particularly at the Hill of Tara. The Hill of Tara has been unbelievably, disgustingly violated. In 1903 and 1904, the British Israelites descended with their Bibles and their digging equipment, and they literally ripped the Hill of Tara to pieces. So much so that this ancient site will probably be never ever properly, found out about, because they did so much damage. And again, they were obsessed with the idea that the biblical creatures from the Middle East existed on these islands and all throughout Europe, and this goes on and on. Now that's bad enough that happened, but the fact that that so-called researchers still use this bullshit today to underpin their so-called researchers' scholarship, it's like that Nuada is Noah. So, this all comes out of Freemasonry, and it was huge and things like this. Remember, a lot of this goes back to Manly P. Hall. I like Manly P. Hall. I don't have a problem with him, but he was a big-time Freemason. And the Freemasonic thing is about deception as well as the truth. And the idea is that if you're intelligent enough, you will figure out the truth from the deception. Unfortunately, everyone repeats the deception as it is. Another Freemasonic deception put out there, and it's like a cancer in alternative research, is the idea that certain monuments around the world line up in a straight line. Now, so you might have a situation where they can connect Stonehenge to Giza, to the Temple of Karnak or something, and then draw a straight line on a map in an atlas. and then find along that straight line certain sites that might fit their dot connecting, literally dot connecting. The thing is that those maps on an atlas that they draw the straight lines on, they're not like that in real life. The earth is curved, so these lines are going the completely wrong direction. They should be, depending on how they're drawn, much, making a radius to the north or a radius to the south. So yeah, but that's interesting too, because you might find that some of these things do connect. So for instance, someone here in Ireland, and forgive me if I don't remember your name, came up with certain alignments between Bridget's Well, St. the Goddess Brid, well in County Kildare, and up around towards some of the monuments from the Boyne Valley and northwards towards County Louth and up around Carnlough Bay, and correctly identified them through line of sight, meaning that you'd really have to be on top of one to see the next one on a hill, be on the next one to see the next one on a hill, rather than sitting down on an atlas and drawing a straight line. And lo and behold, these sites did actually connect across the curvature of the earth. If you don't believe me, you can do this very easily. Say, get Google Earth up. Say, put the starting point of a line in the middle of Stonehenge, and just for academic reasons, or just for arsing around, draw that, say, to the Vatican. You'll see, as you're drawing it, after you pass a couple of miles, the line begins to bow to compensate for the curvature of the earth. This is correct cartography, not atlases with dead straight lines on them. That's why maritime charts are very different than regular atlases and charts, because they compensate for the curvature of the earth relating to the shoreline. So they're different. An atlas just gives you a flat view of the world in 2D to just basically conceptualize where everything is. But remember, the earth is a globe. And so you can't draw these lines in straight lines. You couldn't draw a line straight across the world. You could do it maybe at local areas. But the most beautiful thing about this is that the ones who've done it properly, through examining, say, sacred sites, what I want to call them, or historic sites, through line of sight connection, have actually proven indirectly that the ancients, and I'm talking about the Neolithic people, knew that the earth was round. They knew it was a globe. They didn't believe it was flat. In fact, probably no one ever believed the earth was flat. That even the idea that medieval scholars thought that the earth was flat was an invention by Francis Bacon. He saw a map in the bottom of a church and assumed that medieval scholars thought the earth was flat. In fact, there was Irish scholars, monks, who knew that the southern hemisphere existed. The Vatican from day one knew that the earth was round. And there's so much nonsense put out there. A lot of it is the same lineage as the British Israelites. They're extreme Presbyterians that have gone back through the Enlightenment and then on towards the Protestant Reformation. And basically, they've created lies. They started off by creating lies about the previous. They'd have honorary Protestants like Galileo. When you actually look at the Galileo story, he wasn't actually debating with the Vatican about the curvature of the earth or the rotation of the earth or anything like that. It was purely his political views that got him into trouble. But Protestants had switched it around to make it sound like, I'm not saying Protestant people, some of these Protestant activists, propagandists. And that continued on, and British Israelism came out of that, the perpetuation of these lies, in order to destroy what they did on a small scale to the Catholic scholars of the medieval period. They did on a huge scale to our ancient ancestors by saying they couldn't have done these things unless they were connected to the sky fairy in the Old Testament, this kind of thing. And that's where this British Israelism comes from. It's also where it all goes wrong. And another thing too, people are obsessed with finding pi or numerical calculations at Stonehenge and other ancient sites, and this druidic yard nonsense. And again, it all comes from Manly P. Hall, the area, it's just crap. You haven't even done their basic research. How anyone who claims to be Irish could repeat this Manly P. Hall stuff as fact is beyond me. I mean, Ireland is named after Era, right? The goddess Eru, right? A goddess, an ancient goddess, nothing to do with the Aryans and it. It's just, again, British Israelism, Presbyterianism nonsense. None of it is real. Now, and Freemasonic as well. So you've got to go back and rip things up. Even since the Druid Code had come out, it's going to need a further layers put on top of that. Because although when I wrote the book, as you'll see in the book, I recounted the mythology, but I didn't assume it directly, because I know that Irish mythology was written down by Irish monks, Christian monks, early Christian monks. Now, there are some heroic individuals in there like St. Kieran, who I do believe this is tremendous proof he was a druid, so he probably wrote them down pretty much verbatim. But you have the problem with the Icelandic sagas as well. So you really have to go back to the very, very ancient ideas and start to see the mythological figures as forces of nature rather than gods or something. They're anamorphized forces of nature. They don't actually exist. They exist as ideas to help us conceptualize other things. And this is unfortunate, because then people start taking it literally, like there really was like these individuals. Yes, there may have been a Tuatha Dé Danann. There may have been a people, but they may have been a class of druids or something like that, or a highly sophisticated cultural race. And there seems to be a lot of evidence to support that. So you've got to be really careful with this stuff. Just because you've got to really go back to the very start and look at it. Again, one of the problems, the biggest problem with the Druids, is that people think that the only records of the Druids that exist is the Roman records by Julius Caesar and Pliny and other, Roman historians. There's a vast amount of the information on the Druids from the Irish records. It's ignored by classical scholars because it isn't a classical source. You see, this is what classical scholarship really means. Let's get it back. Let's connect it to the Middle East and the Holy Land. It always comes back to that. Even the Greek paganism has been unfortunately connected to that as well, when it's very much European. So when looking at these things, bear in mind that only alignments of sacred sites or important ancient antiquarian sites can only be verified through line of sight. And if you do them that way, you find out that they do correspond with the curvature of the earth, proving that our very ancient ancestors knew the earth was curved, at least. Maybe they didn't know it was a globe, but they could have. But they knew at least it was curved. Secondly, you can't draw straight lines on a map across vast distances and then connect all the dots in between, because it doesn't work in real life. An atlas is not the same thing as a globe. Try doing it on a globe, it won't work. It just won't work because it's all wrong. And yet there's still books being published today that draw straight lines across maps of the world, maps of Europe, maps of France and everywhere. It doesn't work. Just that Dan Brown nonsense. Secondly, just because you hear someone connecting, say, ancient Ireland to Egypt, and then they cite something like Scotia, and then point to a sign that some local tourist guy trying to get money off, visiting Presbyterians can say Scotia's grave, doesn't mean that was Scotia's grave. One of our ancient Irish ancestors was buried in there, not some Egyptian, character. Not to put down Egyptians. I would never argue with someone regarding Egyptian things because I don't know enough about it. I think that's why I really like the work of Robert Ruffal and even Graham Hancock's work on the Egyptian stuff, is because they almost started with a clean slate. Now, they were fortunate that they have this ready access to Egyptian mythology, but a lot of people made the assumption that we don't have that in the Druidic world. We absolutely do. It's just that they weren't aware of the Irish sources, and it's you really got to go in with a blank slate. Even if you read my book, The Druid Code, take it in, but don't say this is the absolute end story, because at the end of the day, it's just my interpretation. Now, I do put up good historical data. I mean, I do, prove that there's absolutely no records of the round towers of Ireland being built by Christians. So therefore, they're very likely, and also with other circumstantial evidence, they're very likely were built by Druids, because they were not torn down during the destruction or the dissolution of the monasteries. Religious or ecclesiastical buildings, they just weren't. So if they were, they would have been torn down. And so even that stuff you have to look and begin from the start. It's an awful thing to me to see the greatness of our European indigenous ancestors be reduced to footnotes in a story of biblical fairy tales that were corruptions of Canaanite paganism that came before that. It upsets me greatly to think that our ancestors have built Avebury and Stonehenge and Karnak and Vora, that they somehow owe their greatness to being helped by a bunch of Hebrews or a bunch of blow-ins from Egypt. And that to me is sacrilegious in the most appalling way, especially if an Irish person or a British person or a French person or a Portuguese person states that.
Far too long have I travelled in the company of the great patrician to bring the rule of Rome to these foul Gaelic beasts. Their men are sinners of great vanity, who make idols of the sun and the stones. Their women are loose harlots, such would shame the whore of Babylon. Yet while the offspring created by their foul union of both would only be deemed fit for the drainage ditches and effluent pits. However, in the service of the Holy Father of Rome, we shall bring these wretches unto the Lord. Many would have been put to the sword of flame. Some of their kings have even taken our gold and silver coin, yet even they cannot tame these heathen vermin of this accursed land. Yet I will not quiver in my service to Patrick. Each day his army grows, and many are learning to tremble in the shadow of the Redeemer. Yet great danger lurks as every heathen Crumcruic hides behind every tree and rock with sword and axe in hand to disrupt our most holy and apostolic mission.